Welcome to the second online module for moral injury and emerging adults with child welfare histories. In this module, we will describe life stories of young adults who have experienced moral injury. My name is Bailey Jader, and I am a licensed graduate social worker and one of the members of the research team that produced this project. The rest of our team includes Wendy Haight, professor and Gamble-Skogmo chair at the University of Minnesota School of Social Work, Minhae, professor at Memphis University, Linda Kingery, professor at Simmons University and retired licensed clinical social worker, Ndilimeke Nashandi, and Ruth Soffer, both PhD candidates and graduate research assistants. We're grateful for the financial support of the Gamble-Skogmo Endowment and federal Title IV-E funding through the Minnesota Department of Human Services and the Center for Advanced Studies in Child Welfare. In the first module, we introduced our study and discussed some of the findings. In the second module, you will hear stories of two young adults who experienced moral injury in foster care. We'll give a short description of the participants, hear their stories, and discuss their morally injurious experiences. Our focus will center on the physical and social context of moral injury. Research has not examined the extent to which moral injury is shaped within particular physical contexts. Events emerging adults may have experienced as morally injurious may occur in a range of physical contexts with a range of assorted meanings, such as the home, foster home, school, or community. Morally injurious events may be experienced differently, for example, when perpetrated within the home versus in the wider community. In addition, we focus on the social context of moral injury. Morally injurious events are interpreted and experienced within micro-social contexts. Relevant characteristics of these contexts may include the relationships between the involved parties and their roles as perpetrator or target of the moral injury. In Module 1, we described our research of moral injury in childhood and adolescence as described by 28 emerging adults with histories of child welfare involvement. We defined moral injury and explained the research protocol. We also saw how youth aging out of care are among the most vulnerable emerging adults, and that some describe suffering from repeated violations of their fundamental sense of right and wrong. The study has a few main contributions. First, we focused the discussion of moral injury on emerging adults aging out of foster care. We also found that adolescence and emerging adulthood is a time of rapid identity development. And our developmental perspective focuses attention on experiences over time. In this module, we'll hear the stories of two emerging adults and we'll focus our attention on that physical and social context. First, we will hear Anaya's life story and discuss the physical context of moral injury. Then we'll hear Jen's life story and discuss the social context of moral injury. The names and details of the participants have been changed to protect their privacy. Anaya is a 22-year-old Black woman. She entered care at the age of 6 and spent the next 12 years in traditional foster care. Anaya continued to receive support through college, where she obtained a BS degree. At the time of the interview, Anaya was working as a child welfare professional and raising a young child of her own. She strongly agreed with both betrayal subskill items. Similar to other participants, she described multiple morally injurious events that extend over time. In Anaya's own words, I had a foster parent who was really abusive. Well, the foster mom would first of all refer to all of the kids as trustees and inmates. And it was very strict. It was a really strict setting. Me, my brother, and my sister were all dark skinned, and the other foster kids were all light skinned. So we had to sit on opposite sides of the table. We were referred to as the darkies. They were referred to as the lighties. And there's this notion that if you were lighter, you were better. And the foster parent was of lighter skin. She was Black, but she was also really light-skinned, so she was better than everybody. She referred to herself as a goddess, and we were her slaves, essentially. So I didn't feel like I was a kid. I literally felt like I was a slave there. And I think that that's where my low self-esteem developed. It was just drilled into my head that I wasn't good enough. I wasn't pretty enough. I was too dark. Nothing was ever good enough, and sometimes, today, I still struggle with that. The foster mom was very, very emotionally abusive, because you never know with her. Some days, she just loves you, and you could do no wrong, and you're the golden child, and the next day, you're worth nothing but the scum under her shoe, and she made it very, very clear. Like, she would get to the point where she would just ignore us. And, like, people think, like, hey, that's not a big deal. People ignore you all the time. But it was the way that she would do it. Like, she was so passive aggressive, it was ridiculous. And you weren't allowed to talk to her. You weren't allowed to even look at her. She said that, it's her world. We're just living in it. So we need to either figure out how to live with it or jump off the ship. Like, she would just say stupid stuff, like just things that you didn't really even need to say. The interviewer's response was, "Did you ever tell a caseworker about her?" Anaya continues, "We did, but they never believed us. So this foster parent is like a master manipulator. She could do something and we can report it, and then by the time they get done speaking with her, they don't even go any further with it. The kids are lying. Whatever. I remember one time it was family picture day at school, and my foster sister, who is very light-skinned, was beat that morning. Her lips were purple. She had bruises all over her body. And what my foster mom made her do was put on purple lipstick and still go and take pictures. And after we were told, they came and they interviewed the parents, and all of a sudden it came back unfounded. It happened several times. I remember one time where my foster dad hit her in the face with a pan, and she ran to her friend's house and called the police. The police came over, and my foster parents told us that if we didn't lie, that we were going to get in trouble. And we didn't want to be in trouble with them, so we lied. And I felt like I shouldn't have done it, but if you didn't do it, then I would have been next. So it was one of those things where you're kind of on your own. Like, you have to do what you have to do. And it just is what it is. To summarize, Anaya describes multiple events of moral injury. Her story is one example of the physical context in which morally injurious events occur. Her story illustrates how the most egregious events occurred in the foster home that she was placed in from the age of 8 to 16. Anaya's experiences were not unique. Table 1 summarizes the physical context of moral injury as described by the 28 emerging adults with foster care histories that participated in our study. Our analysis shows that morally injurious events occurred in a variety of locations. 14 participants described morally injurious events occurring in traditional foster care, involuntary placements that were meant to provide safety. 12 participants also identified their birth home as the location of the events. Some participants described adoptive placements as a location. 8 participants described morally injurious events as occurring in social service organizations. In addition, 12 participants described some events as extending multiple locations. As illustrated in Anaya's story, she suffered the most from moral injury that occurred in the foster home rather than in other locations, such as her birth home. We conducted a series of Mann-Whitney tests to examine the relations between MEAS scores and the physical context of the moral injury. Participants who experienced maltreatment in their foster or adoptive homes scored significantly higher on the total MEAS betrayal subscale compared to those who did not report maltreatment in their foster or adoptive homes. Our next participant is Jen. Jen is a 26-year-old Indigenous woman. She entered care at the age of 7 and was in foster care off and on for a total of 5 years. She strongly agreed with all but one item on the MEAS. In Jen's own words, "What eats me up really bad inside and I can't forgive myself or let myself move forward right now is at one time I had no income and I was selling some dope. And this guy, he's like, 'Hey, can you sell me a bag?' And I was like, 'Yeah, okay, I'm on my way, bro.' He told me to go into his house this way, but I went in another way. And I walked in on the guy raping his daughter. And I was like, oh my God. And then I just ran out of the house and I didn't know what to do. And I just sat there like, holy crap. I just froze. I was like, I can't believe what happened. I should say something. I'm gonna say something. I was getting up that courage and I was ready to tell the cops because I didn't want no girl to go through what I went through. And seeing that little girl cry and stuff like that, oh my God, I should have did something. I should have done something about it. And I can't forgive myself because that little girl is going to suffer. But the girl's father blackmailed me. He said if I tell that he was going to hurt me and my family. And so I got scared and I never said nothing. And it still eats me to this day. And that's why I hate drugs. I freaking hate them, because look at what it's doing to our people. It's breaking our people down. Unfortunately, Jen's story is also not unique. In the larger study, participants identified several different perpetrators, sometimes multiple perpetrators, within a single episode of moral injury. All 28 participants identified adults as perpetrators of moral injury. Most reported that the adult family members were responsible for the events. These included birth parents, foster parents, and adoptive parents. 17 participants also included professionals, primarily social service professionals. A few of our participants identified other children or youth as perpetrating moral injury. For example, a foster sibling perpetrated sexual abuse. Although Jen described moral injury by another perpetrator, the one that was the most morally injurious to her in the time of the interview was the one in which she herself was the perpetrator because she failed to come forward about what she saw. All 28 participants of the study described morally injurious events in which they were the targets. Similar to Jen, 19 participants also described events in which other people were targets. Most described other children or youth as the targets, for instance, foster siblings or biological siblings. Typically, these events involved observation of maltreatment. An example is a foster sibling who was afraid of the dark, who was locked into a closet, or a biological sibling that was beaten. Jen wasn't the only one who reported moral injury in which she herself was the perpetrator. In a series of Mann-Whitney tests, we conducted to examine the relationship between ME scores and the social context of the moral injury, we found that participants who reported themselves as a perpetrator scored significantly higher on the subscale transgression of self than their counterparts. In addition, participants who reported other children or youth as the targets of morally injurious events scored significantly higher on the subscale transgression of others. Given our study's sample of emerging adults with maltreatment histories, it is unsurprising that all of our participants described adults as perpetrating morally injurious events and themselves as targets. Many participants reported morally injurious events as occurring within the supposed safety of their own homes, about 43%, and perpetrated by those most responsible for their care and nurturance, their parents, which was 61%. When their homes were determined unsafe, government child welfare agencies assumed responsibility for their safety, in these cases placing them in foster care. Yet many participants in the study, actually half, described that moral injury occurred in their foster homes and was perpetrated by their foster parents, coming in at 43%. That these events were salient is suggested by an association between the experience of moral injurious maltreatment in foster homes and total MEAS and betrayal subscales. In addition to morally injurious events perpetrated by parents and foster caregivers, 54% of participants identified social service professionals as those they entrusted with overseeing their care as perpetrators of moral injury. Our previous research indicates that many of these professionals also may be experiencing moral injury. We heard from caseworkers and supervisors of their motivations to enter the field in order to help struggling families, yet they found themselves struggling within a system that they viewed as perpetrating harm to many families through laws and policies, an adversarial stance, systemic biases, harm to children by parents, and poor quality services. The primary limitation of this study is the retrospective nature of participants' accounts. Future research should consult children and adolescents, ideally using a longitudinal design. In addition, more research is needed to fully examine the micro and macro context in which many vulnerabilities of moral injury emerge. Our subsequent papers will explore developmental changes in the meanings of morally injurious events, as well as strategies for coping and healing from them. Finally, multivariate analyses will be needed to interpret the associations described in this study. Previous research indicates that many young people with child welfare histories experience high rates of trauma exposure. Our current research indicates that many also experience moral injury. Providers of services to individuals with child welfare histories should consider that moral injury may co-occur with trauma and may require additional intervention strategies. For example, a young person who has experienced physical abuse in foster care may benefit from cognitive behavioral interventions for anxiety, but also psychotherapy to address the betrayal of those foster parents who are morally obligated to provide care and nurturing. Even those young people whose moral injury did not co-occur with trauma, for example, those experiencing betrayal by professionals who failed to listen and respect their wishes, could still benefit from supportive therapy. This research further underscores the need for system reform emphasized by the child welfare involved professionals and parents in our previous research. Professionals and policymakers should hear these stories and work to change the system to better support vulnerable children and reduce rates of moral injury occurring within the child welfare system. Congratulations! You've completed the final module on moral injury in emerging adults with child welfare histories. Don't forget to visit the website to print out confirmation of completion for CEUs.